World War I-B, or the First World War, the 28th of July 1914 to 11 November 1918, also known as the Great War, was a global conflict between the coalitions, the Allies or Entente, and the Central Powers. Fighting took place mainly in Europe and the Middle East, as well as in parts of Africa and the Asia-Pacific, and in Europe was characterized by trench warfare, the widespread use of artillery, machine guns, and chemical weapons gas, and the introductions of tanks and aircraft. World War I was one of the deadliest conflicts in history, resulting in an estimated 10 million military dead and more than 20 million wounded, plus some 10 million civilian dead from causes including genocide. The movement of large numbers of people was a major factor in the deadly Spanish flu pandemic. World War I French attack from a trench at the Battle of Verdun, 1916 British artillery in action at the Battle of the Somme, 1916 US troops in Renault FT tanks during the 100 Days Offensive, 1918 British Vickers machine gun crew wearing gas masks during the Battle of the Somme, 1916 Ottoman Arab Camel Corps leaving for the Middle Eastern Front, 1916 aftermath of the Russian siege of Przemysl in Austria-Hungary, 1915 date the 28th of July 1914 to 11 November 1918 for years. 3 months and 14 days location Europa Middle East Africa Pacific Antarctic Triton and Adriatic. Result Allied powers victory. See aftermath of World War I. Territorial changes, partition of the Ottoman Empire, dissolution of Austria-Hungary, transfer of German colonies and territories to other countries, formation of new countries in Europe and the Middle East, such as Poland, Yugoslavia, Weimar Germany, Soviet Russia and Soviet Union, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, Austria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Turkey, Hejaz, and Yemen. Causes of World War I included the rise of Germany and decline of the Ottoman Empire, which disturbed the long-standing balance of power in Europe, and rising economic competition between nations driven by industrialization and imperialism. Growing tensions between the great powers and in the Balkans reached a breaking point on the 28th of June 1914, when a Bosnian Serb assassinated the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. Austria-Hungary blamed Serbia and declared war on the 28th of July. After Russia mobilized in Serbia's defense, Germany declared war on Russia and France, who had an alliance. The United Kingdom entered after Germany invaded Belgium, and the Ottomans joined the Central Powers in November. Germany's strategy in 1914 was to quickly defeat France and transfer its forces to the east, but its advance was halted in September, and by the end of the year the Western Front consisted of a near-continuous line of trenches from the English Channel to Switzerland. The Eastern Front was more dynamic, but neither side gained a decisive advantage. Despite costly offensives, Italy, Bulgaria, Romania, Greece and others joined in from 1915 onward.
Major battles, including at Verdun, the Somme, and Pas-Chendel, failed to break the stalemate on the Western Front. In April 1917, the United States joined the Allies after Germany resumed unrestricted submarine warfare against Atlantic shipping. Later that year, the Bolsheviks seized power in Russia in the October Revolution. Soviet Russia signed an armistice with the Central Powers in December, followed by a separate peace in March 1918. That month, Germany launched a spring offensive in the West, which despite initial successes left the German army exhausted and demoralized. The Allied 100 Days Offensive beginning in August 1918 caused a collapse of the German front line. By early November, Bulgaria, the Ottoman Empire, and Austria-Hungary had each signed armistices with the Allies, leaving Germany isolated. Facing a revolution at home, Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated on the 9th of November, and the war ended with the armistice of the 11th of November 1918. The Paris Peace Conference of 1919 to 1920 imposed settlements on the defeated powers, most notably the Treaty of Versailles, by which Germany lost significant territories, was disarmed, and was required to pay large war reparations to the Allies. The dissolution of the Russian, German, Austro-Hungarian, and Ottoman empires redrew national boundaries and resulted in the creation of new independent states, including Poland, Finland, the Baltic states, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia. The League of Nations was established to maintain world peace, but its failure to manage instability during the interwar period contributed to the outbreak of World War II in 1939. Names before World War II: The events of 1914 to 1918 were generally known as the Great War or simply the World War I. In August 1914, the magazine The Independent wrote, "This is the Great War." It names itself. 2. In October 1914, the Canadian magazine Maclean similarly wrote, "Some wars name themselves. This is the Great War." 3 contemporary Europeans also referred to it as the War to End War, and it was also described as the War to End All Wars due to their perception of its unparalleled scale, devastation, and loss of life. 4. The first recorded use of the term First World War was in September 1914 by German biologist and philosopher Ernst Haeckel, who stated, "There is no doubt that the course and character of the feared European war will become the First World War in the full sense of the word." Political and military alliances. For much of the 19th century, the major European powers maintained a tenuous balance of power known as the Concert of Europe. 6. After 1848, this was challenged by Britain's withdrawal into so-called splendid isolation, the decline of the Ottoman Empire, new imperialism, and the rise of Prussia under Otto von Bismarck. Victory in the 1870 to 1871 Franco-Prussian War allowed Bismarck to consolidate a German empire.
Post-1871, the primary aim of French policy was to avenge this defeat. 7. But by the early 1890s, this had switched to the expansion of the French colonial empire. 8. In 1873, Bismarck negotiated the League of the Three Emperors, which included Austria-Hungary, Russia, and Germany. After the 1877 to 1878 Russo-Turkish War, the League was dissolved due to Austrian concerns over the expansion of Russian influence in the Balkans, an area they considered to be of vital strategic interest. Germany and Austria-Hungary then formed the 1879 Dual Alliance, which became the Triple Alliance when Italy joined in 1882. 9. For Bismarck, the purpose of these agreements was to isolate France by ensuring the three empires resolved any disputes between themselves. In 1887, Bismarck set up the Reinsurance Treaty, a secret agreement between Germany and Russia to remain neutral if either were attacked by France or Austria-Hungary. 10. For Bismarck, peace with Russia was the foundation of German foreign policy, but in 1890, he was forced to retire by Wilhelm II. The latter was persuaded not to renew the Reinsurance Treaty by his new chancellor, Leo von Cappernay. 11. This gave France an opening to agree to the Franco-Russian alliance in 1894, which was then followed by the 1904 Entente Cordial with Britain. The Triple Entente was completed by the 1907 Anglo-Russian Convention. While not formal alliances, by settling long-standing colonial disputes in Asia and Africa, British support for France or Russia in any future conflict became a possibility. 12. This was accentuated by British and Russian support for France against Germany during the 1911 Agadir crisis. 13. Arms race. German economic and industrial strength continued to expand rapidly post-1871. Backed by Wilhelm II, Admiral Alfred von Tirpitz sought to use this growth to build an imperial German navy that could compete with the British Royal Navy. 14. This policy was based on the work of U.S. naval author Alfred Thayer Mann, who argued that possession of a blue water navy was vital for global power projection. Tirpitz had his books translated into German, while Wilhelm made them required reading for his advisors and senior military personnel. 15. However, it was also an emotional decision, driven by Wilhelm's simultaneous admiration for the Royal Navy and desire to surpass it. Bismarck thought that the British would not interfere in Europe, as long as its maritime supremacy remained secure, but his dismissal in 1890 led to a change in policy and an Anglo-German naval arms race began. 16. Despite the vast sums spent by Tirpitz, the launch of HMS Dreadnought in 1906 gave the British a technological advantage. 14. Ultimately, the race diverted huge resources into creating a German navy large enough to antagonize Britain, but not defeat it. In 1911, Chancellor Theobald von Bethmann-Hollweg acknowledged defeat, leading to the Rüstungswende armaments turning point, when he switched expenditure from the Navy, Army. This decision was not driven by a reduction in political tensions, but by German concern over Russia's quick recovery from its defeat in the Russo-Japanese War and the subsequent 1905 Russian Revolution. Economic reforms led to a significant post-1908 expansion of railways and transportation infrastructure, particularly in its western border regions. Since Germany and Austria-Hungary relied on faster mobilization to compensate for their numerical inferiority compared to Russia, the threat posed by the closing of this gap was more important than competing with the Royal Navy. After Germany expanded its standing army by 170,000 troops in 1913, France extended compulsory military service from 2 to 3 years. Similar measures were taken by the Balkan powers in Italy, which led to increased expenditure by the Ottomans and Austria-Hungary. Absolute figures are difficult to calculate due to differences in categorizing expenditure, since they often omit civilian infrastructure projects like railways, which had logistical importance, and military use. It is known, however, that from 1908 to 1913, military spending by the 6 major European powers increased by over 50% in real terms. Conflicts in the Balkans surged citizens, reading a poster with the proclamation of the Austrian annexation in 1908. The years before 1914 were marked by a series of crises in the Balkans, as other powers sought to benefit from the Ottoman decline. While Pan-Slavic and Orthodox Russia considered itself the protector of Serbia and other Slav states, they preferred the strategically vital Bosporus Straits to be controlled by a weak Ottoman government, rather than an ambitious Slav power like Bulgaria. Russia had ambitions in northeastern Anatolia while its clients had overlapping claims in the Balkans. These competing interests divided Russian policymakers and added to regional instability. Austrian statesmen viewed the Balkans as essential for the continued existence of their empire and saw Serbian expansion as a direct threat. The 1908 to 1909 Bosnian crisis began when Austria annexed the former Ottoman territory of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which it had occupied since 1878. Timed to coincide with the Bulgarian declaration of independence from the Ottoman Empire, this unilateral action was denounced by the European powers, but accepted as there was no consensus on how to resolve the situation. Some historians see this as a significant escalation, ending any chance of Austria cooperating with Russia in the Balkans, while also damaging diplomatic relations between Serbia and Italy. Tensions increased after the 1911 to 1912 Italo-Turkish War demonstrated Ottoman weakness and led to the formation of the Balkan League, an alliance of Serbia, Bulgaria, Montenegro, and Greece. The League quickly overran most of the Ottomans' territory in the Balkans during the 1912–1913 First Balkan War, much to the surprise of outside observers. The Serbian capture of ports on the Adriatic resulted in partial Austrian mobilization, starting on the 21st of November 1912, including units along the Russian border in Galicia. The Russian government decided not to mobilize in response. Unprepared to precipitate a war, the great powers sought to reassert control through the 1913 Treaty of London, which had created an independent Albania while enlarging the territories of Bulgaria, Serbia, Montenegro, and Greece. However, disputes between the victors sparked the 33-day Second Balkan War when Bulgaria attacked Serbia and Greece on the 16th of June 1913. It was defeated, losing most of Macedonia to Serbia and Greece, and southern Dobruja to Romania. The result was that even countries which benefited from the Balkan Wars, such as Serbia and Greece, felt cheated of their rightful gains, while for Austria it demonstrated the apparent indifference with which other powers viewed their concerns, including Germany. 26. This complex mix of resentment, nationalism, and insecurity helps explain why the pre-1914 Balkans became known as the powder keg of Europe. Sarajevo assassination article. Assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, traditionally thought to show the arrest of Gavrilo Princip right. This photo is now believed by historians to depict an innocent bystander, Ferdinand Baer, on the 28th of June 1914. On the 28th of June 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria, heir presumptive to Emperor Franz Joseph I of Austria, visited Sarajevo, the capital of the recently annexed Bosnia and Herzegovina. Kvjetko Popovic, Gavrilo Princip, Nedeljko Kabrinovic, Trifko Grabez, Vaso Kubrilovic, Bosnian Serbs, and Mohamed Mehmed Bakic from the Bosniaks community, from the movement known as Young Bosnia, took up positions along the Archduke's motorcade route to assassinate him. Supplied with arms by extremists within the Serbian Black Hand intelligence organization, they hoped his death would free Bosnia from Austrian rule. Kabrinovic threw a grenade at the Archduke's car and injured 2 of his aides. The other assassins were also unsuccessful. An hour later, as Ferdinand was returning from visiting the injured officers in hospital, his car took a wrong turn into a street where Gavrilo Princip was standing. He fired 2 pistol shots, fatally wounding Ferdinand and his wife Sophie. According to historian Ben Seaman, in Vienna the event almost failed to make any impression whatsoever. On the 28th and the 29th of June, the crowds listened to music and drank wine, as if nothing had happened. Nevertheless, the impact of the murder of the heir to the throne was significant and has been described by historian Christopher Clark as a 9/11 effect, a terrorist event charged with historic meaning, transforming the political chemistry in Vienna. Expansion of violence in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Crowds on the streets in the aftermath of the anti-Serb riots in Sarajevo. The 29th of June 1914, Austro-Hungarian authorities encouraged subsequent anti-Serb riots in Sarajevo. Violent actions against ethnic Serbs were also organized outside Sarajevo. In other cities in Austro-Hungarian-controlled Bosnia and Herzegovina, Croatia and Slovenia, Austro-Hungarian authorities in Bosnia and Herzegovina imprisoned approximately 5,500 prominent Serbs, 700 to 2,200 of whom died in prison. A further 460 Serbs were sentenced to death. A predominantly Bosniak special militia known as the Schutzkorps was established and carried out the persecution of Serbs. The assassination initiated the July Crisis, a month of diplomatic maneuvering between Austria-Hungary, Germany, Russia, France, and Britain. Believing that Serbian intelligence helped organize Franz Ferdinand's murder, Austrian officials wanted to use the opportunity to end their interference in Bosnia and saw war as the best way of achieving this. However, the Foreign Ministry had no solid proof of Serbian involvement. On the 23rd of July, Austria delivered an ultimatum to Serbia, listing 10 demands made intentionally unacceptable to provide an excuse for starting hostilities. Serbia ordered general mobilization on the 25th of July, but accepted all the terms, except for those empowering Austrian representatives to suppress subversive elements inside Serbia and take part in the investigation and trial of Serbians linked to the assassination. Claiming this amounted to rejection, Austria broke off diplomatic relations and ordered partial mobilization the next day. On the 28th of July, they declared war on Serbia and began shelling Belgrade. Russia ordered general mobilization in support of Serbia on the 30th of July, anxious to ensure backing from the SPD political opposition by presenting Russia as the aggressor. German Chancellor Bethmann Hollweg delayed the commencement of war preparations until the 31st of July. That afternoon, the Russian government were handed a note requiring them to cease all war measures against Germany and Austria-Hungary within 12 hours. A further German demand for neutrality was refused by the French, who ordered general mobilization, but delayed declaring war. The German General Staff had long assumed they faced a war on two fronts. The Schlieffen Plan envisaged using 80% of the army to defeat France, then switching to Russia. Since this required them to move quickly, mobilization orders were issued that afternoon. Once the German ultimatum to Russia expired on the morning of the 1st of August, the two countries were at war. At a meeting on the 29th of July, the British cabinet had narrowly decided its obligations to Belgium under the 1839 Treaty of London did not require it to oppose a German invasion with military force. However, Prime Minister Asquith and his senior cabinet ministers were already committed to supporting France. The Royal Navy had been mobilized, and public opinion was strongly in favor of intervention. On the 31st of July, Britain sent notes to Germany and France, asking them to respect Belgian neutrality. France pledged to do so, but Germany did not reply. Aware of German plans to attack through Belgium, French Commander-in-Chief Joseph Joffre asked his government for permission to cross the border and preempt such a move, to avoid violating Belgian neutrality. He was told any advance could come only after a German invasion. Instead, the French cabinet ordered its army to withdraw 10 kilometers behind the German frontier to avoid provoking war. On the 2nd of August, Germany occupied Luxembourg and exchanged fire with French units when German patrols entered French territory. On the 3rd of August, they declared war on France and demanded free passage across Belgium, which was refused. Early on the morning of the 4th of August, the Germans invaded, and Albert I of Belgium called for assistance under the Treaty of London. Britain sent Germany an ultimatum demanding they withdraw from Belgium. When this expired at midnight, without a response, the two empires were at war. Opening hostilities, confusion among the Central Powers. Germany promised to support Austria-Hungary's invasion of Serbia, but interpretations of what this meant differed. Previously tested deployment plans had been replaced early in 1914, but those had never been tested in exercises. Austro-Hungarian leaders believed Germany would cover its northern flank against Russia. Serbian campaign beginning on the 12th of August, the Austrians and Serbs clashed at the battles of the Sur and Kolubara. Over the next 2 weeks, Austrian attacks were repulsed with heavy losses. As a result, Austria had to keep sizable forces on the Serbian front. weakening their efforts against Russia. Serbia's victory against Austro-Hungary in the 1914 invasion has been called one of the major upset victories of the 20th century. In 1915, the campaign saw the first use of anti-aircraft warfare after an Austrian plane was shot down with ground-to-air fire, as well as the first medical evacuation by the Serbian army. German offensive in Belgium and French German soldiers on the way to the front in 1914. At this stage, all sides expected the conflict to be a short one. Upon mobilization, in accordance with the Schlieffen Plan, 80% of the German army was located on the Western Front, with the remainder acting as a screening force in the east. Rather than a direct attack across their shared frontier, the German right wing would sweep through the Netherlands and Belgium, then swing south, encircling Paris and trapping the French army against the Swiss border. The plan's creator, Alfred von Schlieffen, head of the German General Staff from 1891 to 1906, estimated that this would take 6 weeks, after which the German army would transfer to the east and defeat the Russians. The plan was substantially modified by his successor, Helmuth von Moltke the Younger. Under Schlieffen, 85% of German forces in the west were assigned to the right wing, with the remainder holding along the frontier. By keeping his left wing deliberately weak, he hoped to lure the French into an offensive into the lost provinces of Alsace-Lorraine, which was the strategy envisaged by their Plan 17. However, Moltke grew concerned that the French might push too hard on his left flank, and as the German army increased in size from 1908 to 1914, he changed the allocation of forces between the two wings to 70-30. He also considered Dutch neutrality essential for German trade and cancelled the incursion into the Netherlands, which meant any delays in Belgium threatened the viability of the plan. Historian Richard Holmes argues that these changes meant the right wing was not strong enough to achieve decisive success. French bayonet charge during the Battle of the Frontiers. By the end of August, French casualties exceeded 260,000, including 75,000 dead. The initial German advance in the west was very successful. By the end of August, the Allied left, which included the British Expeditionary Force BEF, was in full retreat, and the French offensive in Alsace-Lorraine was a disastrous failure, with casualties exceeding 260,000. German planning provided broad strategic instructions, while allowing army commanders considerable freedom in carrying them out at the front. But von Kluck used this freedom to disobey orders, opening a gap between the German armies as they closed on Paris. The French army, reinforced by the British Expeditionary Corps, seized this opportunity to counterattack and push the German army 40 to 80 kilometers back. Both armies were then so exhausted that no decisive move could be implemented, so they settled in trenches, with the vain hope of breaking through as soon as they could build local superiority. In 1911, the Russian Staka agreed with the French to attack Germany within 15 days of mobilization, 10 days before the Germans had anticipated. Although it meant the two Russian armies that entered East Prussia on the 17th of August did so without many of their support elements. By the end of 1914, German troops held strong defensive positions inside France, controlled the bulk of France's domestic coalfields, and inflicted 230,000 more casualties than it lost itself. However, communications problems and questionable command decisions cost Germany the chance of a decisive outcome, while it had failed to achieve the primary objective of avoiding a long, two-front war. As was apparent to several German leaders, this amounted to a strategic defeat. Shortly after the First Battle of the Marne, Crown Prince Wilhelm told an American reporter, "We have lost the war. It will go on for a long time, but lost it is already."
Asia and the Pacific. Japanese soldiers occupy a captured German trench during the Siege of Tsingtao, 1914. On the 30th of August 1914, New Zealand occupied German Samoa, now Samoa. On the 11th of September, the Australian Naval and Military Expeditionary Force landed on the island of New Britain, then part of German New Guinea. On the 28th of October, the German cruiser SMS Emden sank the Russian cruiser Jemchug in the Battle of Penang. Japan declared war on Germany before seizing territories in the Pacific, which later became the South Seas Mandate, as well as German treaty ports on the Chinese Shandong Peninsula at Tsingtao. After Vienna refused to withdraw its cruiser SM as Kaiser and Elizabeth from Tsingtao, Japan declared war on Austria-Hungary, and the ship was sunk in November 1914. Within a few months, Allied forces had seized old German territories in the Pacific, leaving only isolated commerce raiders and a few holdouts in New Guinea. African campaigns, British artillery in Cameroon, 1915. Some of the first clashes of the war involved British, French, and German colonial forces in Africa. On the 6th to the 7th of August, French and British troops invaded the German protectorates of Togoland and Cameroon. On the 10th of August, German forces in southwest Africa attacked South Africa. Sporadic and fierce fighting continued for the rest of the war. The German colonial forces in German East Africa, led by Colonel Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck, fought a guerrilla warfare campaign and only surrendered 2 weeks after the armistice took effect in Europe. Indian support for the Allies, British Indian Army Infantry divisions in France. These troops were withdrawn in December 1915 and served in the Mesopotamian campaign. Before the war, Germany had attempted to use Indian nationalism and pan-Islamism to its advantage. A policy continued post-1914 by instigating uprisings in India, while the Niedermeyer-Hentig expedition urged Afghanistan to join the war on the side of Central Powers. However, contrary to British fears of a revolt in India, the outbreak of the war saw a reduction in nationalist activity. Leaders from the Indian National Congress and other groups believed support for the British war effort would hasten Indian Home Rule, a promise allegedly made explicit in 1917 by Edwin Montagu, the Secretary of State for India. In 1914, the British Indian Army was larger than the British Army itself, and between 1914 and 1918, an estimated 1.3 million Indian soldiers and laborers served in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. In all, 140,000 soldiers served on the Western Front and nearly 700,000 in the Middle East, with 47,746 killed and 65,126 wounded. The suffering engendered by the war, as well as the failure of the British government to grant self-government to India afterward, bred disillusionment, resulting in the campaign for full independence led by Mahatma Gandhi.